Welcome back to Nuclear Proliferation Explained. I'm William Spaniel. Today's topic is costly signaling. This is going to be the last lecture on how information problems can lead to nuclear proliferation. But I want to begin by not thinking about nuclear weapons at all for a moment, and just thinking about coercion more generally. Think about the following sort of interaction. An aggressor can either challenge a defender over some policy that they don't like, or quit. In response to a challenge, the defender can either back down, essentially giving the aggressor the policy that the aggressor wants, or it can stand firm, resulting in some sort of conflict. One of the things that determines how the defender will respond to a challenge is how much it cares about the issue at stake. If, for example, the defender doesn't really care very much at all, it would prefer to back down. That's because the costs of standing firm and getting involved in a conflict are simply not worth it for the policy. They would prefer to just give up. Internalizing that, the aggressor should challenge. That's because the defender will back down, allowing the aggressor to capture the policy that it likes. That's better for the aggressor than just quitting and allowing the defender to keep going with the status quo. In contrast, if the defender cares a lot about the issue, it's going to stand firm in response to a challenge. Internalizing that, if the aggressor calculates that the costs of conflict are not worth it, it will prefer to quit. That's because the possibility of a back-down outcome is an illusion. If the aggressor challenges, the defender stands firm, and the aggressor does not want to suffer those costs of conflict. Recapping then, for the situation that I just described, the aggressor's optimal action depends on how it believes the defender will respond. If the defender will stand firm, the aggressor should quit. If the defender will back down, the aggressor should challenge. That's all great when the aggressor knows how the defender will respond. In practice, though, there's uncertainty out there. We've talked about this type of uncertainty in the past as it relates to nuclear weapons, how easily or how willing a country is to build them. Well, a same sort of principle of uncertainty applies here. For an aggressor to know how a defender will respond, it's going to have to know how the internal thought process of that defender is working. Absent that, the aggressor might not know how much a defender cares about an issue at stake, and then in turn, it doesn't know whether the defender will plan to back down or stand firm in response to a challenge. And moving one step up from there, this uncertainty means that the aggressor does not know whether it should challenge or quit on the issue. How does the aggressor handle that type of uncertainty? Well, if the aggressor is optimistic that the defender does not care about the issue at stake, it's going to challenge. That's because it is calculating that the vast majority of the time, the defender is going to back down. And so, in expectation, it's worth giving it a shot. The problem here is that resolved defenders will stand firm in response to that challenge. And that's bad for everyone. Both the aggressor and the resolved defender are worse off than if the aggressor had just quit right away. Unfortunately, trying to communicate that sort of resolve is difficult to do. Imagine if that resolved defender said to the aggressor before the aggressor made its initial move, "Hey, you know what? I'm resolved. Don't bother challenging me." If that's true, the aggressor should listen. The problem, as the aggressor can work through, though, is that if the aggressor took the defender at its word and quit, unresolved defenders would want to tell the aggressor the exact same thing. As a result, the aggressor should ignore the defender's warning. Talk is cheap, and it can't trust that the defender is being honest with its assessment of its resolve. Here's where nuclear weapons come into play. We've talked before about how expensive nuclear weapons are to construct. This makes them the opposite of cheap talk. It's not cheap talk at all. It's an expensive signal. So imagine that in the lead up to this crisis, the defender realized what was about to happen and spent a lot of money developing nuclear weapons. And further, for the sake of a thought experiment, and I know this is going to be difficult, Just suppose that nuclear weapons don't have any actual good use for them. You spend a lot of money on them, and there's ultimately no military value. This is still going to be helpful for the defender. Think about it this way. After the aggressor accuses the defender of lying, the defender might respond that the aggressor has a fair point. But the defender just spent billions of dollars on weapons. And if the defender were truly unresolved, it would not be willing to do that. It doesn't care very much about the issue, and so it would be unwilling to spend billions of dollars on nuclear weapons to convince the aggressor otherwise. However, a defender that cares a lot about the issue might be willing to spend those billions of dollars to convince the aggressor not to challenge. The costly signal implies that the defender must be resolved. The aggressor ought to realize that the defender's argument actually makes sense, and internalizing that, the aggressor should quit and not try challenging the definitely resolved defender. This argument turns the inefficiency puzzle of nuclear weapons on its head. At the start of the unit on bargaining over nuclear weapons, we began with the premise that nuclear weapons are inefficient. However, it's important to remember that war is inefficient as well. And states might want to proliferate because it creates a smaller inefficiency than outright conflict would. In other words, I'm spending this money now because the alternative is that we would be wasting a lot more money in the future due to the inefficiency of conflict. And we can resolve that inefficiency of conflict by removing uncertainty from the equation. Nuclear weapons, being expensive, allow me to credibly communicate information that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. And so I accept that small source of inefficiency to stop the larger source of inefficiency. And if you think about the types of countries that have spent the vast majority of money building and developing and maintaining nuclear weapons, well, they're the types of countries that have large geopolitical interests. And it stands to reason that they may be willing to spend that money to deter challengers from rising up against them. That wraps up this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.